All right, welcome to Durbania Live. I have some very special guests waiting backstage, and we are going to spoiler talk the Chosen Christmas special, The Messengers. Now, we're mostly going to get into The Messengers. It's hard to spoiler talk music, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But we're going to dive into this episode. It's going to be great, and let me emphasize spoilers. So we are going to spoil the reveals, the other things that were in this. If you're not ready for that, come back. Check this out after you've seen the episode. If you don't care about spoilers, or if you've already seen the Christmas special, let's dive into this and let's do it.
Jesus Christ is
People must know.
born.
See, I even put spoilers right there because I just feel the need to emphasize this is a spoiler talk. So we're going to dive into all of this. We're going to blow all of the secrets, and it's going to be a really good time. And we're going to dive deep into some of these characters and some of the stuff that we saw. Before we do that real quick, I want to say thank you to all of my patrons. All of my patrons here are what make this possible. They make it possible for me to do what I'm doing. So I want to thank you guys so much for your support. Another way you can support, I do have Super Chat on. So if you like what you see here on Durbania, whether it's me finding God and this nerd stuff right here behind me or diving deep into The Chosen, you can support Durbania just with a Super Chat or something fun like that. And I think it is time to bring in my guest. Joining me here, we have number one. Oh, I removed them. Now they're here. They're all here. Okay. I hit the right one.
Number one, all of us.
Number one, yeah. I thought I was going to be cool and just do one at a time. And then, you hit the wrong button when you're live and whatever. So joining me is in this corner. Now, let's be honest.
Hello.
The Snipe Life. And right down there, Brandon Robbins. Do you guys just want to go around and tell people who you are and where they can find you?
Sure. Yeah. My name's David Tate. My channel is Now Let's Be Honest. Formerly Now Let's Be Honest About Movies, but I got the About Movies out of there so I could kind of free myself up to talk about other things.
Nice.
And right now I'm basically just doing a series through the lives of the apostles. That's mainly what my focus is on. And I'm actually getting near the end of that. I've gotten to the 12th apostle and we are on Judas Iscariot. So be sure to check in on that on Sunday at 7 p.m. And it's going to be a long video. I do a lot of long videos, so buckle up. I know how to talk a whole lot. So.
My name is Brandon Robbins, and I have a channel that dives deep into the context and history and all the other details of Scripture and really just the world of Jesus to help you see Scripture and things like The Chosen with a whole new set of eyes. And so I do breakdowns right now in a series called Beyond the Words that take the Gospel of Mark and give you all the information you need to know about each chapter so that when you read it, you can understand it in a whole new way. I do breakdowns of each of the disciples and some different biblical characters, kind of tell you some things you didn't know about them, and then do videos about each episode of The Chosen, including what's coming up in this awesome Christmas special. And so that'll be coming out in a week or so.
Awesome.
Who are we?
We are the Snipe Life. I'm Vanessa.
I'm Brandon. We're the Snipe Life. We talk about creativity through the lens of Christianity and break down The Chosen and all that kind of stuff. Talk about Scripture and other creative endeavors. Hopefully in the new year, we'll be doing a lot with other Christian movies and different Christian media and talking a lot about that as well.
Well, these are all fantastic YouTubers. So if you're not subscribed to any one of these guys or Grafted, who is not here right now, please head over to their YouTube channels, hit the subscribe button, and hit that bell by the subscribe button so you're notified when they drop all of their new content. Now, we have all seen the Christmas special probably multiple times. It was kind of fun. Got to hang out with Snipe Life and Brandon Robbins in Washington, D.C. and got to hang out there. Now, let's be honest, David, we missed you. Wished you were there with us in D.C. But what's some of your guys' general thoughts of the whole experience? Whoever wants to go first can take it.
Yeah, I thought it was great overall. Obviously, kind of understanding kind of what the event was gonna be like in general with all the music and stuff. For me, I thought that it was probably a 7.5 out of 10. There are a few things that maybe I would have liked to be slightly different, but overall, I thought it was an amazing event, and especially the new episode I thought it was great. The way that they kind of ordered things, the way that it was written, and even the monologues I thought were just beautiful. So yeah,
awesome.
I'll be honest with you. It was like a constant experience of asking myself, what in the world am I doing here? It was just such a cool and humbling experience to get to, and I didn't realize it until I saw it a second time in the theaters, to look back and think, oh my gosh, like I got to see this with the people who are in it, with the people who created it.
Yeah.
What an amazing experience. And to meet them and to realize that the whole cast, I felt like we're just unpretentious. They were humble. They were really amazing people. What you see on screen, you just get to see it brought to life in real life, even better. And so we just had really great experiences with that. I will tell you, I went in thinking I'm going to be really excited to see this episode. That's what, I always want, is give me the episode, give me the show. But I was surprised by how much I loved the music, and especially the spoken word. I mean, the spoken word was just so rich. Like I didn't even go in intending to eventually create a video about that. But as they're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. This has to be talked about. So it was spectacular.
Yeah, no, I wasn't with y'all up in DC, but I've caught it twice so far. And at the first showing, I still got to meet with Dallas, and I also got to meet with Phil Wickham at that one, because I was up in Dallas for that premiere. And then I saw it back here in Houston for the second time with my college group. But I've got to agree with y'all. I was blown away by it. I honestly went in, and if I'm being entirely honest, I went in mainly looking forward to the episode, because that's usually the type of stuff that I break down on my channel and everything. And kind of like what Brandon Robbins, there's two Brandons here, what Brandon Robbins was saying, the monologues, the spoken words, those are probably the things that were the biggest like standouts for me when it came to just me being like caught off guard by how impressed I was by them. Just because the whole time, like normally I'm probably going to do some breakdowns of those as well on my channel, because I was just impressed by how they incorporate. I'm always impressed by how The Chosen, they always incorporate Old Testament, New Testament, intertestamental stuff. And they do that in a way that helps the audience understand what's going on. And that's something that I've just loved about The Chosen, how it's entertainment, but it's also very educational, but it's not like shoving it down your throat. Like, sometimes you'll have Christian entertainment that is all entertainment, no education, or you have some that's all education, no entertainment. But the way that The Chosen does it is they blend it so well. And I love that, like with the spoken words, then the episode as well, which I absolutely loved. And I can't wait to break that down with y'all. So
looks like you might have been recognized when you went to the theater too, David. That's pretty
cool.
Really? Yeah.
Oh,
so
yes.
Mimi says she thought she saw you there in Mansfield. So
that's so exciting. Yes, I did get a card from you. Okay, cool. Sweet.
It's so funny to be. Oh, go ahead.
Echoing what a lot of you said, I was mostly looking forward to the episode too. Like, I'm not so much a music person. I knew that part was going to be good, but I was mostly looking forward to the episode. I was kind of blown away by how much I enjoyed the music, and I had like my three standouts. I mean, the biggest one that I liked was the children's choir. That was my favorite song, and I was surprised by the fact that that was my absolute favorite song. But it was a blast to see all that put together. But what I loved about the monologues, I felt like if you listen, they would drop these little clues that gave context to the episode. Because I think even in one of the monologues, they talked about how, when you're a shepherd and you're out there shepherding, you get a midwife. So when the lambs give birth and you have the little baby, you wrap it in swaddling clothing. And those are the ones set aside for sacrifice. And so I caught that the first time I was watching it, and I thought, oh, wow. I never put two and two together like that before. And it just made moments like that even more powerful in the episode. And then when Mother Mary brings that up in the episode, it's like, oh, that's what I love. So it was kind of cool the way they placed the monologues. And I feel like if you're really paying attention, the monologues fill in the episode. So with that said, how do you guys feel about just diving into this episode and spoiling the ever-living daylights out of it for everybody? You guys ready to do that?
Let's do it.
All right. So one last time before I dive into this is indeed going to be spoilers. So if you want to go into this cold, this is not ideal for you. We are going to spoil everything and talk about everything. So I'm giving plenty of heads up right now. If you haven't seen this and you want no spoilers, check this out later after you've seen it and come join us in the conversation. That said, you see the little ticker at the bottom. It's going to constantly remind you this is spoilers. Here we go. Number one, let's talk a little bit about Joseph and Mary. I feel like from my time on set and getting to know Raj and Sarah pretty well, and Snipe Life and Brandon, you guys got to meet him too. They have a really good friendship and connection, those two. And I feel like in their performance, that connection really came out. What do you guys think when you were watching Joseph and Mary?
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
think overall it was really cool to see more of Mary's performance because we haven't been able to see a lot of Sarah at all, right? In the way that she performs young Mary, and so it's kind of interesting to see that in a new light. And I thought overall the way that they portrayed marriage in that sense, and an awkward marriage at that, right? where in this situation, it's not like a normal thing where they've been together for a very long time. They're still getting used to each other. Like Joseph talks about certain promises that he's made to Mary about not getting mad, or like, there's just like these little things that you catch throughout that make it feel really real, which is, with a lot of the writing in The Chosen, but specifically in their marriage, seeing the awkwardness of how they've been together for less than a year, well, possibly more than a year, but a very short amount of time in general, and they're dealing with this whole awkward pregnancy thing and everything to do with that. I think they did a really good job with that.
Were they betrothed, or did they go through with the wedding ceremony already?
They're already married at this point. Yeah,
They're betrothed whenever she gets pregnant, but I believe they got married in between.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right before she has the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I had a debate with my co-host Kristen when we were on set because we were filming a little video, and I was talking about their husband and wife. She goes, "They're not married yet; they're just betrothed." So we went back and forth on that a little bit. Brandon, you had an interesting off-camera point that I think would be fun to discuss here.
Which
Brandon
one?
Robbins about the sign.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm not gonna get into it too much because I'm gonna talk about it in a video. But yeah, there's this moment where they're going into the town and there's a sign, and if you go see it again, you should look at it and pay attention to what it says because it's interesting. I will tell you, there's actually something incorrect on the sign. So one aspect of it is really cool. It gives you some details about the world that they're living in and kind of how they measure roads and things like that back then. But then there's something else that's, I hate to say it, but it's actually just plain wrong. And I don't know how that happened, but I'll talk about it in a video next week. I will say, so from my perspective, one of the things that I loved so much about them is we talked about the chemistry, but there's just like one particular moment where they're in the stable together, and I think they're prepping for her to give birth. They're like making the beds or something like that. And she just looks at him and she says, "I love you." And I don't know if this is true, but it truly felt like an ad-libbed kind of line by Sarah where it was just so genuine. Like you felt it in that moment. And as I look back at the episode, and I have some things that, I've looked at and I've wondered why they did it this way and that way, but I get the sense that so much of this episode is meant to focus on them and their relationship and to give us kind of a look into what it would have been like to be Mary and Joseph in that moment. And they did a wonderful job of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they once again, to go back to the chemistry between them, I just thought that was really cool. They'd released like a 5 or 6 minute clip ahead of time, the clip of them walking in, whenever she wants to get off the donkey and walk for a little bit. They released that in the live stream, so I did a breakdown of that. And so already from that 5 to 6 minute clip, I was already really excited to see what they were going to do with them. And whenever they finally get to the stable and start interacting with one another, I just thought it was so cool. Just a lot of there were times whenever both times I saw it, the audience would just start cracking up laughing whenever Joseph, like the eyes he would make in response to some of the stuff that Mary did. Like people just start laughing because he's trying to wrestle through the situation, trying to figure out how to respond in a godly manner, but provide and do all this stuff where he's just in over his head. And I just loved their interactions with all that. But one thing that really stuck out to me is how earlier on in the episode, whenever Mary is sitting on the donkey and Joseph's going around trying to get a place in the inn, it kind of does this thing where the background starts shimmering a little bit, and it's almost like it zooms in on Mary, and she starts praying to God, and she's quoting Psalm 63, like, "Oh God, you are my God, earnestly I seek you, my flesh yearns for you." And I thought that was really cool. But later on, when they're in the stable, you have Joseph talking with Mary, and he starts quoting from that exact same Psalm to her. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was so cool how, like earlier, I mean, it's not like he heard her quoting that one, but it shows how it's almost like they've shared that psalm with one another. And that's a very important psalm to both of them. And I just thought that was cool. I guess the writers of the show really like that psalm because it's also the same one that little James sang in season 1. It's also the reason I know that's because it's also my favorite psalm. And so I love the psalm. But I thought it was cool that they were like quoting that to one another. And then also whenever Mary starts reciting her own song, I thought it was cool how Joseph like asked her to share it, and then later on, elderly Mary, she's like saying how she wished she had shared it. As somebody who enjoys writing and enjoys writing songs, I know like that personal feeling of sharing something like that with somebody, and I just thought it was really like a cool little detail to where she was kind of apprehensive and like meek and didn't want to share it with him, but then later on she's like, man, I wish I had. And I just thought that was really sweet. It just fleshed out the relationship really, really well.
Yeah. No, I loved how they fleshed out the relationship so much. I mean, you could just feel I said it in my spoiler-free review that there's a little bit of a love story there because like you guys said, it's kind of this awkward marriage. And it's a very weird and difficult situation that they're placed in that really is completely unheard of. And so it's really cool to see them trying to navigate that and then trying to navigate that together. And you can tell they're already in love, but it still feels like it's this little love story where you just see them connecting on deeper levels. And I love those moments when like Mary wants to get down from the donkey and she has to convince Joseph, no, it's okay for me to walk, please, I want to walk. And just those little moments where they walk and talk, and how Joseph wished his messenger said to him that with God all things are possible too. And so those little lines that they drop, and that's something that I really liked. I think The Chosen does a good job with the humor. So you have this seriousness, you have this awe, you have this stuff that The Chosen does really well. Then they sprinkle in these humorous moments. Like our whole theater in DC cracked up, and my whole theater that I hosted the other day cracked up when Joseph, after Jesus is born, he falls on the ground laughing. And he's just like, I don't know how you did that. Kind of just the thing that I guess any first-time father would probably think, like their first child right there. Like, I can't even believe you did that. So like little moments like that were just so cool, and they made it feel so real. And it was really fun to see the actors in that moment. And one of the big things that people keep talking, you know what? Actually, I'm going to save that for a little bit later. That's right. Never mind. I'm going to stop talking.
I love the part too when Joseph says, he goes, "Are you better?"
Are you better now? Yeah. No, I love those moments. And the Psalm thing, I wanted to talk about that because they do have a lot of fun with the Psalms. I love it in season 1, episode 7, that they end the Nicodemus conversation. And he pulls up the judgment part of Psalm 2. I kind of forget the wording of it where he says, I can't remember.
It's like, kiss the son, lest he be angry with you. Yeah.
Lest he be angry with you and you perish in the way. And then Jesus pulls him up and hugs him. And he says, but all who take refuge in him find, oh man. See, now I don't even remember the verse. So now I can't even do it justice. That's okay. It's the Chosen's job to do it justice. But I love how they take the Psalms like that and they put those Psalms in there, and they really do a great job with it. And it was really cool how they did the timelines. And so nice next little topic there, because when you're overlapping, what is it, AD 48 with 4 BC, I think it is incredibly creative because like you already pointed out, where you find out Mary never shared that psalm with David that she wrote. That was kind of heartbreaking, especially because you thought eventually she was going to like share it maybe while she was in labor or something. And then you cut to the future and she's like, yeah, I never shared it with him. So it kind of adds a little bit more emotion into that. What did you guys think about this dual timeline thing that they did?
So the one thing that stuck out to me, I actually talked about this in my spoiler-free review, but one thing I thought was really neat about how they did this timeline is that a lot of the times, this is more like a cinematography aspect of things, but typically whenever you watch a show that's dealing with 2 different timelines, they'll usually film one of them different, like where they have like a filter over it or something like that, so that the audience, it's almost like spoon-feeding the audience to where oh, we're in a different timeline now. I appreciated that how the episode was directed. They didn't need to do anything like that. It was filmed the same way, but the direction was so clear that from the first shot of any given scene, you immediately knew what timeline you were in. And I just thought that was really cool because it just shows how well they did it. And it was almost, I think, consistently back and forth. The second time I watched it, I was kind of just tracing how many scenes we had in each timeline. And I think it was going back and forth from each one the whole way through until at the very end, whenever you have Mary Magdalene kind of going to visit Luke and stuff. But I just thought they handled it really well from a cinematography perspective. And so I just thought I'd mention that.
Something really funny, and I do want to bring this up because it is quite hilarious. When I was on set, there was a certain character. They did everything in their power to keep secret. So keeping in mind, spoilers ahead. And they did everything to keep this character a secret. They put on the call sheets, they didn't put the character's name. They made up a name and they put Grace there. I walked by the trailer and instead of the character's name or the actor's name, they put Grace. They really wanted to keep this as a great big surprise. And right below me here, the Snipe Life did a trailer breakdown.
Yeah.
And they called it. So we get Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary in this AD 48 timeline. So I thought that scene was incredible. I mean, the moment she entered, it just ramped up the emotion of the scene and everything that was going on. Snipe Life, why don't you guys kick it off since you were one of the first to really predict it and tell everybody that Mary was going to be here?
Yeah. Oops. This is probably like the fourth or fifth thing that we've kind of spoiled. The two big ones being Judas in the season finale, which we talked about a week or two before the season finale, which Dallas kind of talked to us a little bit for that one, but and then this one was another big one. But like 90% of my energy was focused on the future timeline because I know what's going to happen in the other timeline, right? Like they can't really do anything that's super creative in that timeline that's going to be different than what we've seen a million times, right? Because people are so used to their traditions, and I'm sure Brandon Robbins is going to bring up some stuff about this for sure. But
Yes.
But just talking about the older timeline, there's nothing that really grabbed me and interested me. It was the future timeline that I saw all the possibilities, right? And so like as we're breaking down the trailer, I'm going frame by frame and trying to figure out exactly what's going to be happening in each frame. Like I think at one point you see like the Cairo symbol, which is a Christian symbol from later on. And obviously you see Luke, and we didn't know who those two other faces were going to be. And then we see Mary, and the reason why we know it's her is because, we saw her long black hair, the way that her costume design is, the headdress that she wears. You see her in like 3 or 4 different clips in the trailer, but always from the back and showing the other person that's in the scene, because that's how they often shoot scenes, right? Is to have that person on the third. So yeah, it was in my mind it was like they're probably trying to hide this, but this is definitely what it is for sure. But I love the two timeline thing. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was cool to see Tychicus, and I know that's a different subject, but and seeing Luke, again, spoilers, you have been fairly warned. But yeah, I just loved it. I loved how they're relaying the stuff to Luke, because that's where we get the major story of the birth, right? So yeah. I loved it.
Brandon Robbins, you're awesome.
You're awesome, dude. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I loved about how they brought Mary Magdalene into it, and it was the introduction of Mary's psalm, because I'm guilty of this. Can I admit this and just be honest? I'm a Bible reader. I love the Bible. But sometimes I just blow past Mary's psalm. I don't mean to, but it's not always something that I think about or something that sticks with me. And what I love about The Chosen is how it could take those things and really put emotional weight on something that maybe you didn't think about before. So by bringing Mary Magdalene into this situation, it was very cool, because already, like, Liz is so good at crying and then making you want to cry. So the moment she comes on the scene, and she's just like, you see the emotion, especially when Mother Mary is asking, how can I pray for our boys? Where are they? And what are they doing? And it was kind of interesting to get the rundown in this timeline of AD 48 of where they were. Mm-hmm. I ran into Thaddeus in the lobby in DC, and I asked him, I said, so where's your character at this time? He goes, I'm not allowed to tell you. I was kind of mad at that. But it was very emotional to hear how Andrew could be arrested at any given moment, and how at this point we hadn't just lost Big James, but now we've lost Nathaniel. And so dropping those lines was very impactful. And then you take that and you lead that to the whole purpose as to why she's even in that room. And that is to hear Mary's psalm so that she could give that psalm to Luke. I mean, do you guys have any other thoughts about, I'm actually kind of curious, because some of you guys do more of the history stuff than I do for sure. I mean, what do you guys think about the accuracy of Mother Mary in Jerusalem, Mary Magdalene coming to Jerusalem? I mean, do you guys have any thoughts on things like that, as well as like the performance side?
Does it say the city that they're in?
You know, I guess
I don't believe that it does.
Jerusalem, because those were the big Jerusalem gates.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but I don't know that they may not.
Yeah, I don't believe it was clarified.
Jerusalem, but yeah, I assumed it was Jerusalem just because of the gates, but I guess it didn't. But yeah, when it comes to the history aspect of things, the things that really stuck out to me, honestly, was the parts whenever Mother Mary is asking Mary Magdalene for the updates on the boys, because this is, talking about all the traditions about the apostles, and that's literally what my whole series on the apostles has been lately on my channel. And so it was kind of fun for me, like hearing her like list out the different places that they went to, because I actually wrote them down. She said that Simon the Zealot, he was in Persia, Lebanon, Armenia, and all over the place. And that's one of those things where I kind of just looked at what traditions we have, and it does seem like there is at least a tradition of Simon the Zealot traveling to Persia, of those different places. And I thought that was cool. And the James thing, him being dead, that's something that we saw at the beginning of season 2, episode 1, right? Or it was the flash forward at season 2, episode 1 was shortly after James's death, and that would be around AD 44 probably. And so that'd be about 4 years earlier. And then I guess Nathaniel died somewhere in between there. And I just thought it was cool because also Andrew, they said that he might be arrested sometime in Greece. And traditionally, Andrew did die in Greece by crucifixion. And so I thought that was fun just seeing that
Well,
stuff.
that's depressing. That's not fun. That's
no. Okay,
that's
sorry.
depressing.
They did it for Christ. They did it for Christ. They counted it joy as they did it.
That's true. Yes.
But I was just saying, when it comes to like Easter eggs and stuff like that, it was fun as somebody who just was like doing all that like research into it. But yeah, I guess being crucified is not a very fun or pleasant experience.
Yeah, let's talk about the 48 AD for a second, because like that for me is like there's a lot of things that are like interesting when it comes to that. So it's 19 years after Christ's death, right? And then on top of that, it's like Mary would be like 67 years old here. Mary Magdalene would be, what would she be? 33 plus 21, something like that. So she'd be like 54, 55 here.
She looks good for 54.
So like it's pretty interesting. And then also like Lazarus here, if he is still alive during this time and not somewhere else, like he would be hunted down by the Jews. Like they really wanted to kill him almost as much as Jesus, right? Like we see in John 12 where they're plotting just as much to kill Lazarus as they are to kill Jesus, because of the whole thing. Like everybody's becoming a Christian because of Lazarus, right? Because of this resurrection that's happened. And so it's really interesting to see all these different characters and how they play in during this time specifically.
Yeah. No, it was, I mean, again, like I don't know too much about all these histories, and I had to look some stuff up. So I did some research on Tychicus. I can never say his name, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. And I did a little bit of research on Lazarus, and I found all of that really, really interesting to get into it. But yeah, I didn't do a whole ton of research into some of the stuff they were dropping in that opening sequence. But it was very cool to have Mary and then talking about where the disciples are, that we've gotten to know so well, and just 16 short episodes, for some of them way less than 16. So it's amazing how it's one of those things you don't realize how attached the show gets you to the characters until you get to a scene like that and they drop info like that and you're like, oh, Nathaniel's dead, the I saw you guy. No, like, you hear things like that and it's really sad. But then when they did the psalm and Mary was giving her psalm, like I said, like something that usually I'd go through scripture, maybe blow by it. Now it adds all this weight to it, and it was very cool how Mary herself, like young Mary, was describing to Joseph how that song came about. Or no, was it older Mary talking to other Mary? I get it confused. Either way, a Mary was talking to somebody about how so much joy in meeting Elizabeth, and this song just burst out. I mean, what did you guys think about how they emphasized Mary's psalm and then the way they used it over the delivery of baby Jesus?
I mean, I think it's one of those questions I get a lot. I even got it tonight at dinner. Was this in scripture? Where did this come from? And I think one of the things that The Chosen is very honest about is this is not scripture, but one of the things I think they do well is they try to give you a sense of how it might have happened based on other research that they've done or other factors that they're including. And I mean, I think, we're all trying to figure out as we read that, okay, Mary in this moment, right after Jesus is born, breaks forth in this song. Like, when did this come about? And I mean, whether or not it happened with Elizabeth, in that moment, I think it's fair to say that there's a high likelihood that Mary is processing all of these things and trying to put into words what she's going through. And so we get this psalm that's just, woven with all sorts of other things. And it's just this beautiful manifestation of that. And so I think, they try to bring us into that moment. And what they do so well, and you just alluded to this, Chris, is they humanize the characters of the Bible, which I would say this is one of the first times in my lifetime I feel like that's ever actually been done on film. Yes. Because you may have characters on film, but to humanize them to the point where you connect with them and you see yourself in them or you can relate to them, that is what this has done that few other things have. And that's, I think, why it has such an impact it does.
Yeah. No.
And one thing that they had Mary say after she was talking about the psalm is she talked about, she told Mary Magdalene, it's always hard because there's two Marys here. There's two Brandons in the video, two Marys on the episode. So she's describing to Mary, she said, it felt like these were the very words of God, but they were also my words, and I don't really know how that worked out. And I thought that was funny that they included that, because that's basically how every systematic theology class discussing how the Bible is written goes. People are like, okay, so it's like the Spirit inspired the authors, but it's still the author's words, and we don't really know how that worked out. And so I thought it was funny because it's basically like that's exactly what she was describing. She's like, yes, it was God inspiring me, but it was also me talking. I don't really know what to do with that. And then at the end of the whole psalm, Mary Magdalene says it's like Hannah's song, only better. Or more beautiful.
Yes.
And that's the classic, The Chosen. They're incorporating the Old Testament in there because Mary's song in Luke chapter 1, I think? It's very similar to Hannah's song in 1 Samuel chapter 2. And so I thought it was cool how they included that because they don't explain it. Once again, I love that The Chosen doesn't spoon feed the audience. They just include these references that makes you be like, what's that about? And then you go do the research and it's kind of always pointing you back towards the Bible. And that's what I've always appreciated about the show is that they do that to where even though they're doing something that is embellishing on scripture, they're always getting you hungry to go study it more.
Yeah. And you make a really good point there, because I did think about that when Mother Mary said that line that they were my words, but they were God's words. And it's like, I don't think any of us today, certainly none of us today, know what that tension is like, because scripture is done being written. It's closed. But what would that have been like, receiving the words from God that become scripture? And that was just so interesting to hear Mother Mary talk about that. And that's what I love about The Chosen. They're not afraid in fiction to, through our experience, explore something like that. What is that like to get a word from God like that? And here she was just in a moment of rejoicing. And in that moment of rejoicing, this psalm of praise comes out that are somehow her words, but God inspired. And so I like how they're able to do that unique tension and not to, touch a sore spot here. But when you have Jesus rehearsing a sermon, I loved it. And I never thought of it as bad until, everybody said it was bad. But when I think about it, though, they're exploring the tension of Philippians chapter 2, the fact that here he surrendered a lot and he humbled himself a lot. He didn't consider equality with God something to cling to. I have the verse written down here somewhere, but you know what I mean? He let it go and he became a human. He was fully God and he was fully man. What is that tension like? So yeah, we have Jesus rehearsing a sermon. It rubbed people the wrong way, but it started the right conversation because this is just fiction exploring the idea of somebody that's fully God and fully man. How can we even comprehend that? And then here we are with Mary. Like, how do we even comprehend the spontaneous praise that flows out of her mouth? And I love their boldness to be able to explore something like that creatively.
Yeah, and you said something else earlier I think is really great that they do. You talked about how they can take scriptures that we pass over and they can bring them to life for us. And I remember when that happened, I think it's season 1, episode 6, where Jesus is in the home of Zebedee and they start asking him about his lineage. And that is a passage I guarantee in my life, I just basically skipped 17 verses of Matthew and then just got to chapter 1, verse 18 and just started reading or whatever, because it didn't I didn't connect with it at all. But then when they put it in there and they connect it to Jeconiah and all this other stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here. And so now you're engaging with scripture in a whole new way. And I think they've done that with the Magnificat.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I can derail for just a second, like one of
Derail
my favorite like things about lineages in the Bible is to do with actually Noah, because Noah's grandfather is named Methuselah, right? Which in the ancient language basically means when he dies it will happen, right? And so if you go through all of these lineages, right, and do the math yourself, which you can do, then all of the ages basically that connect everybody and that would show when Methuselah would die, it's the exact same year that the flood happens. And so when he dies, it happens. And so there is importance in these lineages far beyond, just naming these people, but there's definitely connections there. So
that's awesome. Yeah, and that's always. Can you tell? I drank some water off screen, and it just got everywhere. Don't know how that happened. Let's distract from that and talk about this unpronounceable name.
Tychicus.
Say it again.
Tychicus.
Okay, I did a little bit of research here, but I'm curious to hear like your guys' thoughts, because Snipe Life, isn't this the premiere you just did right before we went live, talking a little bit about who this this guy is?
Tychicus.
Yeah. So in The Chosen, they do pronounce it Tychicus, which is fine. They can pronounce it however they want. I think it is pronounced Tychicus, just like we see with a lot of the other CH words at that time. It was like a K sound. And so Tychicus, it seems to be a really cool dude. There's actually like a lot, like not a lot, but like more than like your standard like little James or Thaddeus in the Bible about Tychicus. And so it's kind of interesting to look into.
Yeah, I love how Lazarus actually asked him about Paul, because it's in Paul's letters that he's mentioned the most.
Right.
So I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, Paul mentions him in like Ephesians, Colossians, Titus, 1st and 2nd Timothy. I think there may be one more, but there's definitely a bunch of passages where he's mentioned as a partner in the church and as someone who is doing a lot of these other things. Even in Timothy, a lot of people think that he was sent to Timothy to take his place so that Timothy would be freed up to do other things. And so definitely an interesting character that I'd love to know more about, but unfortunately we don't know that much about him at all.
And my limited research was just very interesting because, you look it up online and what they really do is just point you to the very few verses he's mentioned in, but it's constantly he's called a beloved brother, and you see him serving alongside Paul. And I think a lot of times you kind of see him like delivering things for Paul, or like you said, trying to, relieve Timothy so Timothy could go do something else. So it's very interesting that as he's in that carriage, he's got a very, we might have lost Brandon Robbins for a second there. But we have a very interesting package that he's delivering to these gates here, that he's delivering to Lazarus. And so it's really interesting to see that and to do this little bit of research. Like you said, The Chosen doesn't spoon feed this to us. We have to look it up ourselves. And so it was very cool to look it up myself and to see what a helper he was. I'll give you guys a real quick behind the scenes story. It was fun because I was there when they were filming some of that night stuff, when you see him come up on the road and he stops and he sees the gates. He goes back, he checks the back, and then he knocks the papers down and puts his hood up and prays. So I'm standing out there in the field, and they call it magic hour because the sun is setting, and it's that magic hour where the lighting is just right, but you've only got maybe an hour. So you got to do this quickly. And some things that you don't see while you're there, especially if you're me and you're little and you're standing way back in the field. I didn't see him knock the papers down. Obviously that's a close-up shot, one that they do later, and they don't necessarily have to do that like right there at that big moment. So I didn't quite see that, but I get to see this horse and carriage pull up. I see him stop, examine things, go pray, and then, right off. And that was really kind of cool. Hopefully Brandon Robbins will be back here in a second. Internet
Maybe
problems.
his phone died.
Oh, that bites. Okay. Well, he'll be back. But it was just really interesting to watch that. And then the next night we filmed them at the gate. And let me tell you, it was cold. And not only was it cold, but think how quickly that scene went by, right? It was very short. That was about 4 or 5 hours. 4 or 5 hours in the cold. But from my perspective, here's what I see. He stands up and panics when that soldier asks him for his papers, and he turns around all over the place and he can't find them. There's this genuine panic. But then he just picks up the papers and everything's fine. And I'm like, I wonder what just happened there. Like, I don't understand what happened. So when I saw this on the big screen, it was very, very cool because then I see the close-up shot of him knocking the papers down. And I went, oh, okay. I see what's going on here. But then to see that hand slide the papers out for him to get, I was like, oh, that's wicked awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that was a really cool experience to, get that behind the scenes look while I was there, and hadn't read the script. They didn't want me to, or Kristen to, so we were just kind of like in the dark. So it was very cool to see what they were doing there, wonder what they were doing, and then finally get to see it put together on film. What were you guys thinking? Who did you think was hidden back there in the carriage when you were watching it the first time?
I actually missed that the first time when we watched it. Like, I missed that he hid it. So, like, I was like, oh, somebody's just passing him information. But I had no idea who it was. Well, I imagined it was Mary, but, like, I didn't put it together quite yet, so. Yeah,
I wasn't sure. Brandon texted. He said that his computer died, by the way.
Fun.
But he'll be back on soon, hopefully.
Cool.
I thought it was maybe multiple people, and Mary would be one of them. I thought it was, some sort of like smuggling ring. Like, I don't know what was happening exactly, but best guess was a bunch of people in a cart. But
I thought it was going to be either Mary Magdalene, or I thought it could be Luke. I wasn't sure if Luke was going to actually be traveling there or not. And then but also, this is just a fun fact because we were talking about how to pronounce Tychicus. I did look it up, and in Greek it's pronounced Tychicus.
Tychicus.
And so I guess that, because the reason why I wanted to look that up is because it really threw me off in the show, because they pronounced it in, like, I don't remember how, it was like Tychicus or something like. Yeah, it was something strange to where I was like, it sounds like Tychicus, and I know that's a biblical character, but I wasn't sure, and so I had to go on IMDb and I had to like look it up, and sure enough, it was like Tychicus. I was like, okay, it's just something about how they pronounced it. It kind of threw me off, but pronunciation is kind of weird. I think other people are more like adamant about pronunciation than I typically am. I don't really care, but I just thought I'd look it up because we were talking about it.
Yeah. Anything we can make content about, David.
Yes, anything. Now, we were having an interesting off-camera conversation because obviously they're sneaking Mary in. So there is heavy persecution going on. But y'all had made a very interesting point that at this point in history, maybe it wasn't so much the Romans that were doing that persecution. Can we have a little bit of that off-camera conversation right here?
Yeah, I think that's probably more of David and Brandon's realm of knowledge, but yeah.
So the if you go into the book of Acts, you see that the earliest Christian persecution wasn't actually afflicted by the Romans. It was actually by the Jews. And so you have the martyrdom of Stephen early on in like Acts chapter 6 and 7, stuff like that. And that's when you have Saul of Tarsus, who's leading the way, like persecuting the church, but eventually he gets converted. He becomes a Christian. And then there's relative peace for a bit. And then you get to the event that we had in season 2, episode 1 with Big James getting killed. And that was around AD 44. And it seems like that kind of kicked off the second wave of persecution. And that was predominantly a Jewish-led persecution. And the Roman persecution wouldn't have started until probably quite a bit later on, because at this time period, Brandon, welcome back, by the way.
Yes.
I believe, Brandon, you were saying that it was Tiberius who would have been emperor at the time period, AD 48, correct?
Yep, it would have been Tiberius.
Yeah, so Tiberius, he wouldn't have been necessarily afflicting the Christians at this time period. So it would have been the Jewish, like they would have had to fear their fellow Jews more so than the Romans. But I guess a way to justify this is that technically the Romans were just conducting a search as they were going into the city. And so maybe the guy was just very paranoid about it for no reason. maybe, it was never explicitly stated that the Romans were persecuting them. They just, whenever Mary Magdalene was talking with Mother Mary, she just said that a lot of people were persecuting them. And that technically was true. And so I guess you could kind of work your way around it and justify it. But more realistically, the Romans probably would not have been persecuting them at this time period.
Yeah. Any thoughts to add to that, Brandon? We're talking about
Tychicus,
that guy, smuggling Mary into the city to meet Mother Mary, and just kind of talking about the type of persecution that would have been on them at that time.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, I think, probably so little to go on there that we could see it in any number of ways. I mean, so what I came in and heard David saying is, that this wasn't a time of real Roman persecution. And so that said, I mean, Jewish people were seeking them. And so they could have absolutely been searching for her. She was one of Jesus's closest disciples, the person who was the first to witness the resurrection. And that's a big deal. And so you could definitely imagine that people would be after her. Or maybe they just want to figure out how she hasn't aged in 15 or 19 years.
Yeah, I mean, whatever secret that is. Where did you get that? Yes. Well, this is a great segue into Lazarus, come forth. I can't do that without thinking Carmen's song, Lazarus, come forth. You guys know Carmen? You familiar with that hit in the 80s song, Lazarus, come forth?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm dating myself, and it's horribly hokey, but it's also wonderfully magnificent. And
hey, I'm still in my 20s, and I know that, so it's not too bad,
Oh, there we go. Everybody should go on YouTube and look up Carmen, Lazarus, come forth. Allison Lewis in the comments says, yes, she gets me. Anyway. So I just kind of want to toss this out here. This is going to be a time of speculation. I have clearly, they don't tell me a lot of stuff. I haven't read any season 3 scripts, so I'll be joining you in complete speculation. But I think Dallas has said in a live stream that there's going to be a reveal in this episode of a character who's going to be in season 3. And I think clearly that reveal was Lazarus. And that was a character that we've all been waiting to meet because of how close Jesus is to him and Mary and Martha and all of that stuff. So we kind of been waiting to see how that's going to happen. So we got Lazarus. How do you guys maybe speculate we're going to feed him now into season 3?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting for me because I think just like we were talking about before, I think what Brandon said is very applicable where Dallas and the team write a very human story, right? And so the whole idea is that we want to be connected to these characters, like with Judas, right? We're gonna be very connected to him before everything happens, right? I think the same thing is gonna happen with Lazarus, and so I think that we are going to see him in season 3. Dallas has made that very clear. He's even posted on Facebook with a picture of Lazarus saying, I can't wait to, do stuff with this character in season 3 and all of that. But I don't think that we're going to see the death and resurrection of Lazarus in season 3 at all. I think that because of that character development, because of the humanization, Dallas and the team are going to want to take time for you to get invested in Lazarus and then finally, have him get ill, die, and then be resurrected. Maybe in season 4, maybe even in season 5. And so we'll kind of see where that goes. But I don't think we'll see the death and resurrection of Lazarus in this season. But
I definitely think we'll see it later because isn't it within the few weeks before his crucifixion that he does it? And it made the religious leaders incredibly angry because here is more proof that this guy is the Messiah. I mean, he raised a dead person.
Well, he goes back to him like a week before he's crucified, and then that's when the plot begins to kill Lazarus because a bunch of people are gathering right with Lazarus and Jesus. Though I don't know if there's a definite time frame in between when he was resurrected and when Jesus was crucified.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
John's gospel is a little tricky to figure out the timeline of things sometimes because it's so different than the synoptics. But yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, Brandon. Like this is all about characters and connecting, and we've got to be sad when he dies, and so like they've got to build up that relationship between us as an audience and him as a character, and just give some depth to that. I would be honest, I was really surprised at how young he was. I don't know why. I mean, this is all the time I realize how many images have been in my head impacted by maybe a picture I saw or a children's book or some, depiction on television. And I just, for some odd reason, always thought he was old. Like, it doesn't make sense that he would have been old and gray haired and long bearded. Like, I mean, I don't have any reason.
Well, isn't that how we picture all these Bible people other than Jesus? Like, we just picture them all.
But he would have been.
Hair.
He would have been in 48 AD. He would have been in his 50s, right?
Yeah. I'm just thinking like when he died, like during Jesus's ministry, I imagined him like that.
Do you guys think it's going to be the same actor then that played him here that we're going to see in season 3?
That's what I was wondering because it looked like I couldn't tell if they'd done any like makeup or anything on him to make him look older. And so, but I'm assuming that they would because it'd be kind of weird to just cast this guy for a one-off thing and announce him as like a big recurring character. And then
there's two fathers of Matthew in season 1.
Are there really?
Yeah, in the one scene, in the very small scene where it shows on Shabbat dinner, there's a different actor for Matthew's father than there is in the actual episode in episode 7.
Wow.
You're so good at catching stuff
Wow,
like that.
that's crazy. I did not catch that.
Kind of like there's been 3 big Jameses. Only it's
Right.
funny. I didn't even I thought there was only 2. And then when they said there was 3, I had to go back and go, really? And then I watched.
And the crazy thing is, you met all 3 of them. You just didn't.
But okay, so when it comes to my theory, I mean, this is just like an on the cuff, like just theory in regards to how they could introduce Lazarus. And this is always, they could always change this up depending on how they work with the timelines and stuff, because timelines are pretty tricky when it comes to the Gospels and stuff, and they're pretty flexible with that. But we know that we're getting the feeding of the 5,000 in season 3. And biblically speaking, the feeding of the 5,000 happened shortly before a Passover. And that's why there were so many people in that area, because people were like heading from Galilee down to Jerusalem for the Passover. And so I could see it happening to where maybe, they're going down to Jerusalem for the Passover. And we know that Lazarus lived in Bethany, which is right outside of Jerusalem. And so it could be an opportunity where they could just have Jesus and the disciples traveling down to Jerusalem, and they need a place to stay. And maybe he would stay there with, like, maybe they'd be introduced to Lazarus, something like that, and they could like stay there, and then it could have something to where over the course of the next few seasons, every time they go to Jerusalem, they stay with Lazarus. Mm-hmm. And that would allow you extra time to flesh out Lazarus's character to where he's recurring, and you don't have to like force him into the plot. He's just somebody who's always there, and it's evident that he's a friend of Jesus. You understand why Jesus cares for him so much, so that if you get to like season 4, season 5, you would have that connection with him. And so I think that would be a cool way to introduce him. I have no idea what they're doing, but just thinking about how they could, that's one theory that I have.
Well, and I think there's so much that they can do with these characters. And I think that's what's really cool about it. Like, I mean, when you see in scripture just this kind of sense of how much Jesus cares about Lazarus, or especially when you get into his sisters, right? When you start talking about Mary and Martha, and we have these caricatures of them that we've kind of created based on this like one story, but how might they develop that in the show and really develop those characters? I think is really exciting to see how that comes out. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this idea of 3 Marys. I really hope they don't go with like Big Mary and Little Mary. That's probably not going to work.
But speaking of the Mary and Martha thing that you're talking about there, that's something I could totally see them adapting in season 3, because that would be a good opportunity for them to introduce Lazarus, like whenever he's at their house. And I'm assuming you're talking about the incident where Martha's preparing all the food and Mary's sitting there at Jesus' feet. I could see that being an opportunity for them to introduce Lazarus in that episode or something.
Yeah. I didn't think about the fact that we're adding yet another Mary to the roster as we introduce the family of Lazarus. And here we have
there's so many Marys,
multiple Marys. Oh, this is good. Maybe they'll just call her Miriam. Who knows? Make it easier. It's interesting. I did just a little bit of research about like what happened to Lazarus after Jesus raised him from the dead. Very cool how it emphasizes how the Pharisees really wanted him dead again, right after Jesus raised him up from the dead, because they just wanted to get rid of this evidence. But it's interesting because all I could find is this speculation. And so some people speculate that Lazarus and his sisters, they moved to Cyprus, where Lazarus became the bishop of Kittim and died of natural causes in AD 63. So this is just, I found it on the internet, so it's probably all wrong. But, and then another one says that Lazarus might have moved to Gaul to preach the gospel and then became a bishop somewhere and then was beheaded under the tyranny of Emperor Domitian. So it's like interesting to see these people speculating where Lazarus was after he came back from the dead, but we don't really have too many written in stone stuff. So, I mean, what did you guys think of this portrayal of him? Like, where do you think John is? John, who's supposed to be taking care of Mother Mary, but now it seems to be Lazarus who's taking care of Mother Mary.
I didn't know what to do with that.
Anybody's guess. Yeah, for sure. All these things are like out. So there's so many things that could be anywhere, right? And like we take anything, right? Like little James, what was he like? Well, we have like two sentences in the Bible about him, like we know nothing. So it really could be anything.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to jump into it.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it did kind of throw me off that Mary was staying with Lazarus, just because we actually talked about this ahead of time before we did the stream. But it's kind of weird because you do have this moment where Jesus entrusts Mother Mary to John. And we have that referenced in season 2, episode 1 in the flash forward, where John calls Mary mother and Mother Mary calls John son. But then it's like, why is she with Lazarus? Like, especially in her dying moments, because I think traditionally she went off with John to Ephesus, and I believe she died there. But I just thought that was very interesting how, like, I think they was more just they just needed this to happen for the sake of the plot. But it was something where I was watching it and it kind of took me a second. I was like, why is she here at this moment right now? And I guess technically she doesn't have to always be at John's side, but it did kind of throw me off a bit.
And yes, Brandon Robbins, I did say Bishop of Kittens. But let me spell it for you. Kition. Kiton. Whatever. I don't know.
It'd be really fun to be the Bishop of Kittens.
It would be fun to be the Bishop of Kittens. I think that would be absolutely great. But I thought we should clarify. Yes, I really did say he was the Bishop of Kittens, as I'm trying to pronounce this. As you can tell, like if you were to read the Bible with me and hear what's going on in my head as I'm reading these names, it'd be a good time had by all. Now, this is something I'm kind of excited to get into because Brandon Robbins, I feel like this is your time to shine, my friend. Born in a stable. Need I say more, Brandon? Have I triggered you enough? What did you think of this? Like, you've talked about this in a few videos. You sent me a few links to videos where you talked about this, and you have a lot of really great thoughts on this. And I would love right now, what did you think of this? Like, was that more of a room for you, or do you think that was too much like a stable? Let's go.
Yeah, so time for me to probably make some enemies. So I would say actually to say born in a stable might actually be partly accurate.
Okay.
So where we get really off in our depiction of the birth of Jesus is that he was born either in a cave, which is actually a notion that comes from this like extra biblical document called the Proto-Evangelium of James, which is like rejected by the church. It's not even written until the late 2nd century, but it so impacts our current belief about what the nativity looks like, including things like the Magi showing up and all this other stuff. But anyways, so the reason the idea of Jesus being born in a cave or even being born in like some separate stable outside of an inn is not correct is because of a mistranslation of the word kataluma. And so it's this Greek word that does not mean inn. It means a guest room in a house. It's a very specific spot in a house. Pretty much every house would have a kataluma. The word for an inn is actually the Greek word pendakion. And pendakion is the word like used in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where it says that the Samaritan takes the man to an inn, right? Like this separate sort of place where you would pay for somebody to be able to stay for the night. That's what a pendakion is. It's an inn, but that's not where Joseph and Mary stay at all. It says there's no room for them in the kataluma. And so basically what that's saying is there was no room for them in this upstairs guest room in the house. And so then we're left to figure out, well, why is Jesus born in a manger? And the reason is because pretty much every house in the 1st century in that area would have had a place inside of the house where they kept the household animals, right? These animals like goats and things that they would use for food or for other purposes would have this place in the bottom floor of a house, and there'd be a manger there. And so because Mary is going to be ritually unclean, because there's people there for the census who are all probably part of this family, because everybody from this family's got to come to the town at the same time, there's no room for Joseph and Mary upstairs in the kataluma, in the guest room. So they stay downstairs in this household area where the animals are kept, and Jesus gets put in a manger. There's also so many other things about this story that like our traditional view of it just doesn't even make sense with the 1st century world. Like for one thing, hospitality is so important in this part of the world. I mean, it is just a staple of Middle Eastern culture. And the idea that this couple would come into a town and this woman would be going into labor and people would just reject them and say, go do it yourself in a cave is like shameful to the town of Bethlehem. Like it would just shame the whole town that they would reject somebody like that because hospitality was so important. And so that idea we have that they're knocking on doors and everybody's like, there's no room at the inn. It just doesn't even make sense with that whole culture at the time. And so this idea that there's no room in the guest room, but they're down with the household animals is much more what it would have looked like.
So what did you think of that whole portrayal? So you have Joseph talking to presumably what we traditionally know as the innkeeper, and there's no room, and Joseph comes back really frustrated. But he might have met that hospitality thing because he did mention the stable. So, I mean, what did you think of that whole sequence of events and then being in the stable?
So I think two things about it, like two reasons why I think they probably had to do it the way that they did it. One is because it would take a lot more time and characters to try to explain what I just explained in an episode for people who are coming from a blank slate, and not even a blank slate, really, like this image in their head that they've had their whole lives. Like that's a lot to undo with characters in a show in that moment. And so for just simplification and, cinematic purposes, I just think that would have been really hard. I don't know how they would have done that. The other thing I think that, unfortunately, if they had done it the way I just communicated, would have probably hurt this episode, is that this episode is really so much about Mary and Joseph. I mean, it's about their relationship. And to convey it the way that I just described, in some ways, you almost have to like take Joseph out of that moment, and you put in these other, people who are women in this household who are helping with the birthing process in that moment. And now you got all these other characters in there, and it just doesn't tell the same story. And they're trying to tell a very specific story in this episode. And so, I mean, I agree with why they did it. And it was kind of funny. Dallas like pointed this out when I talked to him right after the event, and he's like, we kind of had to do it the traditional way, and you can tell people what really happened. And so, that's what we're doing.
I think I slightly disagree with you, Brandon. I think that they could have done it, and if we can take some time just to walk through what I think could have been done. I think again, humanizing the characters, right? He talks about this character named Samuel, right?
Yeah.
Who they're going to go to their house. So Mary and Joseph, that first scene happens like normal. They get into the city, but instead of going to the innkeeper, they go directly to Samuel's house, right? Because they know him very well. They've been family for a long time. There's other family members that are showing up at the house. The house is so full that everybody is there. They might have been able to squeeze room for Mary and Joseph, but the family's heard about what's going on, and they don't want anything to do with this illegitimate baby, right? They don't believe in this whole Messiah thing. The family disowns them basically in that moment, saying, we don't want anything to do with you. You can stay here, but you're going to have to stay down with the animals. You can't stay with the rest of the family. Even if we could squeeze room for you, we just can't handle it, right? So the focus goes on to the family for a second, but then immediately goes back to Mary and Joseph, who are now alone in the bottom of the house, right, with the animals. And so now not only have they been pushed out by their family, right, and put into this place with the animals, but they're also having to deal with this birth that's happening, right? And the family again wants nothing to do with it. Yes, it would make it a little bit more complicated, and other problems would have had to be solved. But I think it could have been an awesome story beat as well. I think it could have been done
totally
well.
the way that I thought they were going to go as well. So like they're mentioning this friend, I'm like, oh yeah, they're doing this right.
Yeah.
But then it's like we can't find them because they didn't know this. It was almost like he didn't know the census was going on. He's like, why are there so many people here?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was weird, but I mean, the story overall
it was great how it was.
Yeah,
it was great how it was. But I'm saying if they did want to do it that way, I do think that there was a way they could have. Maybe it was just time constraints. They didn't want to figure that out or whatever. But I do think it was great the way that it was.
Yeah. I think one of the cool things too, like when we find these little things that maybe aren't super historically accurate, I think what's important to remember is to let those things remind us this isn't scripture.
Right.
This is just a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should watch it. We should be entertained by it. And the fact that it doesn't go against scripture, because I think it follows the heart of scripture and doesn't go against scripture, but we remember that it's fiction and we allow it to give us a different perspective. So I think sometimes when we find those little errors here and there, those little things that probably didn't look that way, I think those are really great reminders. Like, no, this is just a reenactment. Let it drive us into the truth and find the truth more. And so it's been very cool, like listening to Brandon Robbins more on this stuff, because I didn't realize all that, I didn't realize all these different Greek words that I'm not even going to dare to pronounce right now. But it's very cool because I would never have really researched this without the Chosen or without the messengers. And so it's very cool to have something like this that gets you really excited, kind of like Marvel would get you excited to dive into a comic book because you want to know what's going to happen with Thanos, so now you have it the better way. You're watching this and you're like, well, now I want to see what the Bible has to say about that. So I think things like that are really cool. One of the things, so this is me just coming from a complete emotional level, and I think this is an image that really stuck out to everybody, is Joseph shoveling the manure. So, I mean, you get that powerful image in the trailers. you get this powerful image in the, movie. And my sister called me as she was driving home from watching the movie, and she's telling me how powerful Joseph shoveling the manure was. But I think it highlights Philippians 2:6-7, where it says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being when he appeared in human form. And I think what that does, just bringing you into the raw dirtiness and grit of it, that he wasn't born to a king and a palace or wealth or this, but here they are shoveling the manure so that Mary can have a place to give birth. They're cleaning the literal feeding trough so that they could lay Jesus in it. And so that's one of the things that I found emotionally powerful about that scene. And then when you take Mother Mary, and Mother Mary is saying the psalm, and it's being overlaid with the labor and the reality of young Mary, where she's scared. And she goes, maybe we should get a midwife. Joseph, I don't want you to see me in this condition. I think we should get a midwife. The way it put that urgency into every little moment as you're dealing with the dirt, the grit, and the grime, the human emotion of fear. And yes, Joseph's hysterical eyes when they would get really big when these things would happen and stuff. I mean, what did you guys think as we are getting deep into the nitty gritty of the birth scene?
I like that this gives more attention to Joseph. I feel like Joseph is kind of one of those characters who he's forgotten. He gets pushed to the side because Mary's so important and Jesus is so important. And yeah, there was Joseph, but he's not the real dad of Jesus kind of thing. But in this, what you're talking about, just the humility of Joseph in this moment and what he's willing to do out of love for his wife. I think there's so many moments in scripture that we may not realize that really speak to where we see a reflection of Jesus and Joseph and kind of vice versa. And one of the things I realized when I did a video on Joseph is the moment where he talks about him divorcing Mary, and he's willing to divorce her quietly, and realizing that when people found out she was pregnant, they would have thought, oh, it's his baby, and he just left her. And he's taking all the shame and all the pain upon himself so she doesn't have to feel it. And like, how much is that Jesus and what he's done for us, of taking our shame upon himself so we don't have to experience that pain? And I think this episode just did another really great example of that, of helping us to see this man who raises Jesus, and we get to see pieces of him and Jesus and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is to backtrack a little bit, back from the birth scene, but it's a moment that I really liked that showed Joseph and Mary's character once again. And it was in that scene whenever they're walking together, and she like gets off and walks for a bit, and they're talking about, the messengers visiting them, like the angels visiting them, and just the different messages that they conveyed. And then at the very end of the interaction, Joseph says to Mary, I wouldn't change a single thing since... because the whole time he's kind of been downplaying himself, right? He's been like, well, God told me to do it. I don't know if I had a choice. He's kind of been downplaying himself. But then he finally turns to her and he says, but I wouldn't change a single thing since that dream. And then she says to him, I wouldn't either. And it's like this sweet moment that kind of just sets the tone for the rest of it, so that whenever you finally get to the stable and you have Mary screaming in pain. I love when it's going back and forth between elderly Mary and then young Mary, she's reciting her poem, but then Mary's giving birth. And she's screaming, and like you just feel like I teared up the first time I saw it, just watching it. And then whenever they pulled Jesus out, and then Joseph starts like washing him, it's just something very sweet about Joseph's character there. And then he starts laughing about, oh my gosh, I don't know how you did that. My heart almost stopped. And the whole time you're watching this, and it also just a few moments before that, right before Mary's water breaks, whenever Joseph's not even looking at her because he's looking at the Aurora Borealis over there, the angels appearing to the shepherds like 30 miles in the distance. But I just thought it was really like just everything that they did with Joseph. I'm just kind of restating what Brandon said. I like that they did that because he is a character who gets overlooked a whole lot.
Yeah.
But if you we only know a little bit about Joseph, but what we know is all amazing stuff. Like even whenever he doubted Mary's situation, he still was going to divorce her quietly, which is that's crazy.
Yeah. Now, you brought this up, so I want to talk about that Aurora Borealis of angels because I call this #the chosen verse. If we have a Marvel verse and a DC universe, we now have the chosen verse. And what I love, one of the things I really, really enjoyed about watching this is it was the shepherd. it was the first movie, it was from a different angle.
Yeah.
And I think overall, and I'm sure if we really dig in, and I love it if we did, and we could find little plot holes here and there, but I think as a whole, they did a really good job of the shepherd is from the angle of the shepherds, but now the exact story from the angle of Joseph and Mary. And it was one of the coolest scenes because I remember I'm on set and they're preparing for this Aurora Borealis scene, but nobody's saying what it is. They're just, like the script says a bright light. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And nobody's telling me what that means. I'm trying to interview people and get good stuff out of them, but they're not telling me a darn thing. And, they have this light set up just to put a little light on Joseph's face and all that stuff. And I was like, what are they going to do here? And so when this scene happened, the full geeky comic book Marvel nerd in me wanted to jump out of the seat and just scream because when I saw that Aurora Borealis, it took 2 seconds and my mind went, those are the exact same colors as the lights that was shining on the shepherds and the shepherd. It's the angels. It's the angels from the other point of view, the other perspective. And the nerd in me was so excited to see the expansion of the Chosen verse. I'm just curious when that happened. I mean, are you as nerdy as me or like, what was your thoughts when this happened?
I can confirm. I was sitting right next to Durbin, so he was like, he was like freaking out. He's like, he like audibly was just like, wow.
that is truth. I was quite a few times. Yeah.
As soon as I get my hands on this episode, I think I'm going to sit down and I'm going to like grab the shepherd, grab this episode and see if I can like splice it together to make like an hour-long episode. Yeah. Just because it was so cool. Like that's immediately what I was thinking when I was watching it, because I wasn't sure how they were going to do it. I figured they weren't going to like retcon the shepherd just because it was so crucial to the Chosen getting started. Yeah. But I thought it was cool because even earlier on in the episode, you had them running out of water and Joseph turns to Mary and says, we just need to find a well where we can get you some water. And if you go watch the shepherd, you have them looking for water and the shepherd offers them water. And so it's like where you could literally splice this together to where it just makes like an hour-long Christmas episode. And I just thought that was really cool how well they did that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So are you hearing this, Dallas Jenkins, Daryl Eves? Are you guys watching this right now? We would love a super cut, like the final cut, the shepherd and the messengers cut together in one motion picture event. That would be
and next year they
epic.
Next year they can do the wise men and they'll show up a little bit a few years later, something like that.
There you go.
Yeah. So
they do the perspective of the angels. That'll be epic.
They just got to keep it going for 7 seasons. So
7 seasons. We're gonna find a new angle.
They'll do King Herod.
Yes.
King Herod. Then they'll do the sheep.
Yep.
Oh, the sheep. Well, then they already do an animated movie from the animals' perspective. I mean, it's not the Chosen, so it's not really in universe, but it could be an alternate universe. So if we cross timelines with a character like the Flash or something,
the Flash will show up.
Definitely see that. Yeah,
they'll do that they'll do that very well known part in Scripture when Jesus gives up all of his godhood and becomes human, and and we'll see how that was depicted exactly like it is in Scripture, because we all know exactly how that looked like. So. Yeah.
Who knows, like maybe a few years from now, they'll like do an episode of the family in Bethlehem, like, hey, where'd Mary and Joseph go? They never showed up. And that'll explain and tie it all together.
They'll do Samuel's perspective and he'll just be there and it'll just be a totally normal, like just night, nothing will happen. It's just, they'll just be sitting around eating dinner and then the episode will end and nothing interesting will happen the whole time. It'll be fine.
Yep. So by season 7, we'll have 6 or 7 episodes that we could put together into one mega movie of everybody's perspective.
There you go.
It'll be one incredibly unique hodgepodge of things there. Well, I have this one slide, but we really talked about this, and I think we did a really good job. And it was the birth, because the birth, you guys covered it. I mean, it was so sweet, like Joseph's reactions to it, and the way that he dipped water on the baby's chest and was cleaning the baby, and it's one of those moments where you just have a tender moment between Mary and Joseph where he just kissed her on the forehead. Things like that I thought were pretty spectacular. But before I move on, does anybody else have any other final thoughts on these angels or the birth or anything like that?
Well, I think the thing that just got me the second time I saw it is that baby is Jesus. And something about that just hit me. Like when you think that our Lord was a helpless baby crying out. I mean, just there's something incredibly powerful and rich about that moment. And I think it's very easy to overlook in that episode because so much of the focus is on Mary and Joseph and there's this baby, but that's Jesus. Yeah, that just hit me.
Yeah, and to draw attention once again to Mary, like the pain that, what is the actress name who plays Mary?
Sarah Ann.
Young Mary, Sarah
Yeah,
Ann.
young Mary, Sarah. Okay, well the pain on her face whenever she's like screaming, right, and like you don't hear her screaming because there's music playing and you hear like elderly Mary like reciting the poem, but the pain on her face as she's giving birth, and then you see the baby, and the moment she sees the baby, she's just filled with joy. Like it's like this pain that gives way to immediate joy. And it brought to mind, I think it's John 14 or 15, whenever Jesus is talking about, like the birth pains and like the pain of somebody giving birth immediately gives way to joy. It kind of just brought that to mind, because that's exactly what's happening right here with Mary, where she's in this severe pain and Joseph's freaking out. Everybody's freaking out. And then the child is born. And I just thought it was such a sweet moment. And then I think right then the music kicks in. I'm pretty sure that's whenever I started tearing up the first time I watched it, because it was like the way the music kicked in right then. It was like, oh, it was just so, so good. And moments before that is whenever Mary had, looked to Joseph and said, like, I'm scared. And he says, hey, how did the messengers greet both of us?
Yes.
Don't be afraid. Because, I mean, fittingly, the angels, anytime an angel shows up, they're like, don't be afraid, because it's usually a pretty terrifying event.
Yeah.
And that's whenever, I think that's the moment after he says, don't be afraid. That's whenever she says, I love you. And I don't know, whenever she says, I love you, and he says it back, you're just like, it just like hits you.
It does.
And the whole scene was just so well done.
Well, it's just the whole humanity of that, because I feel like nowadays we have such a stained glass picture of the whole scene, and it's so beautiful and it's so pristine. But, we forget that they're human in the midst of all of that this was a huge thing, and it was a scary thing. And maybe they felt unworthy or incapable or any number of things. And there was Joseph to remind her, what was the first thing your messenger said to you? Don't be afraid. And that's our Christian walk. That's why we got to cling to the word. And so we got to remember what God has promised us in his word. We got to bring those things before our mind and be reminded of what he has said. And so, I thought that was a very powerful moment for that reason, because it took away the stained glass. It showed the real humanity. And these people that we place up so high are really just like you and I. And just like you and I, they need to be reminded of the promise. They need to be reminded of what was told to them. Don't be afraid. And let me just say this real quick. I agree with Alice and Lewis. Got to keep the chosen verse going. Really enjoyed that aspect of it. The Marvel fan of me was excited and oh gosh, I can't read today. But expecting an end credit scene. So seeing that baby was sweet for me too. So we got to keep hashtag the chosen verse going. We're going to expand the chosen verse. So
I was really expecting to see like just like the foot of the shepherd walking into the thing or something like that, like just to kind of hark back to it, like connect them a little bit. But
they did do the one thing where whenever Mother Mary at the end, she gives the swaddling clothes to Mary Magdalene, and she says there's a tear in it because we ripped off part of it to help one of the shepherds tend his wound. And that was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like that was where they explicitly stated these are connected.
I had to go back and watch that, and like that was a really cool connection.
That was another moment. Maybe Snipe Life here can attest to this. I almost jumped out of my chair because it was the chosen verse. Yes, it's the shepherd. Like it was just so cool to have those acknowledgments to the first one, the one that started it all. And even though that one is canon, because obviously it was the pilot episode and it started everything, there's something that feels good about getting this perspective with the current actors once the show was blown up, and then taking the shepherd and folding it really truly into canon and seeing these actors that we've come to know so well as older Mother Mary and, Liz Tabish as Mary Magdalene, and seeing this story unfold for them and hearing the story about the shepherds and the torn blanket wrapped around the shepherd's wound. So things like that were very, very cool for me. So the Marvel geek in me was freaking out. Everything was freaking out. It was so cool.
You could have even done an Avengers style end credit scene. You have the wise men walking into this palace and they're saying, we're here to see the king. And then you have like this shadowy face look up. What king? It's like, where is this king to be born? And then just like cuts to black.
While at the bottom it says 2 years later.
Exactly.
yeah.
That would be awesome. It was definitely way better than Marvel's Eternals. I'll tell you that for sure.
I still haven't even seen it.
Good.
Forgive me if you're gonna
just wait for that to hit Disney Plus.
Forgive me if you're going to talk about this, Chris, but one of the things that I felt like really jumped out in that moment in that scene too was the swaddling.
Yes.
Like that, the depth of that, which just happened to like be something I had just recently stumbled upon myself of this idea, that, and they like hint at it very subtly in the episode, but when the shepherds when the angel says to the shepherds, it will be a sign for you and you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloth. Like the swaddle is the sign that this swaddling cloth that was used for lambs is the sign that they've found the Messiah. Like that connection's so rich. And I loved how they pulled that out and they made that such a powerful part of this episode.
And I think that was mentioned in a little more detail in one of the monologues, which is what I'm talking about, how they so strategically place the monologues so that when you go into the episode, the monologues give you a little bit more context. So in the past, I've read over the scripture about the swaddling clothes a million times. Yeah, of course you're going to wrap a baby in a blanket, but it was really cool to have this emphasis to really see how everything was a sign. Everything was a purpose, and it was God revealing that plan. And the fact that it's amazing and it's sad because here's the swaddling clothes around a newborn baby, but that's what they did with a newborn lamb before sacrifice. He is the firstborn, swaddled in the clothing, and he's being set aside for sacrifice. On the one hand, it's so joyous because that's our liberation from sin and death. That's our liberation being born into the world. The other thing is that's incredibly heavy to handle. It's literally the sign. He is the firstborn set aside for sacrifice.
Yeah. And there's so much in there. I mean, just like all of those pieces, even like, so the swaddling too isn't just ceremonial. It's because when lambs come out, they thrash. And so the swaddle is meant to keep it tight so it can't blemish itself. And so, it kind of takes it back and just like, it emphasizes this idea that Jesus is the perfect sacrifice, like completely unblemished. And the shepherds would see that and they would make that connection in that moment.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the original shepherd. Like, because literally the final line is, did you finally find your unblemished sacrifice or something like that, right? That's how, and the look on the guy's face is like, I found the kid in the swaddling clothes. So
Yep. And actually, it made a lot of sense out of that scene because I remember watching that going, would the shepherd have made the connection? Because they were talking a little bit about how they thought the Messiah was going to be a conquering king in that episode. So for, the shepherd to smile at the end of that episode saying, did you find the sacrificial lamb? Would he have made that connection? This helps me see how he could have made that connection because of the swaddling clothes and the imagery and how being a shepherd, and that's what he's supposed to do when that firstborn lamb is born. It makes that connection a little bit deeper for me and answers things that weren't answered for me the first time. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, last but never least, we got Luke, the physician, finally brought into this story. So we've seen John, the gospel writer, Matthew, the gospel writer, and now we are seeing Luke for the first time. So we have Luke in Rome. Is that accurate? Would he have been in Rome in 48 AD? Do we know this?
I didn't look that up.
Oh, good. So we can just say, yes, he was. Perfect.
Well, it probably depends on where Paul was at. Like if Paul was in Rome, Luke was probably in Rome. He might have, I'm thinking Paul might have been in Caesarea at this time.
Oh, okay.
I'm not totally sure. But
do you know what year Paul died?
Paul died.
No, I don't actually.
That was in the 60s, right?
I don't remember. I
believe he's in the 60s.
But Mary says that Paul, in the episode at least, in the chosen canon, Mary does say that Paul's in Rome.
Yeah, because I don't know if Paul would have been in Rome at this point yet. I think he probably, I don't even know if he'd written Romans at this point yet. And at the time he wrote Romans, he hadn't been to Rome. So I'm not sure. I think Luke probably, if he was with Paul, he'd probably be in Caesarea or something at this time period with Paul in prison there because Paul's always in prison. But
so I found on Wikipedia, which we all know we can trust explicitly.
Absolutely.
That Paul probably died somewhere between 64 to 67 AD. Does that sound right to everybody?
Yeah.
So AD 48, he would have been alive. So I guess the question is, would he have been in Rome?
Yeah, I think Paul would have gotten converted around, or converted is not necessarily the right term. I mean, he realized that he was not following the Messiah, and he came to follow the Messiah. That would have been around, I think, AD 33 to 36-ish. It just kind of depends on where you think Jesus died, probably 3 or 4 years after that. And then he was kind of off on his own for a bit, and it took a while before he actually got his ministry going. And so I don't think he would have been in Rome quite yet. But that's fine.
Yeah.
To me, I like the historical stuff. I think I've realized the more I watch The Chosen, the historical stuff's cool and the cultural stuff's cool, but I'm always focused more on the theology. And so
Sure.
the history, I'm like, that's fine as long as you don't change like who Jesus is. And
Yes.
I think, and that's why I understand whenever people got upset about like did he prepare a sermon thing? I just think that they weren't gracious enough with it because ultimately
Sure.
we just don't know enough about that stuff. You know, we don't know how the hypostatic union of Christ really worked. We just know he's truly God, truly man. And
No, only you don't, David. I mean, I know. I know.
Okay.
Sure.
That's my bad. I just need to do more studying. But no, I think if anything, it's not contradictory, right? We just don't necessarily know where Paul's at. Like the Bible doesn't give us timelines. History didn't exactly work back then how we do it nowadays. I mean, nowadays, every morning when I write in my journal, I write like what day it is, what date it is. They didn't do that back then. So it wasn't really as important. You just need to know what people did.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's almost as important. And here's why, because, you know, we talk about Israel all the time. And by the way, if you want to go to Israel, come with us in 2023. But we have this concept as Christians, right, where we read the Bible and it just becomes a story, right? So if we do just focus on the theology of things without planting it in our world, right? Like when you go to Israel, it changes your perspective. You really change the way that you read the Bible, changes the way that you interact with basically everything in your life. And so if we can ground things in the history, right, it makes it more real to us so that we know that we know that we know all of these other theology pieces that we have along with it. And so for me, I think I do put a little bit more weight on the history of things because it grounds it for me in my mind so that it's not just a mental exercise that I'm doing of here's what I know, but it's actual things that I can look at and say, here's what I know, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
right.
I think I might have misspoken a little bit when I said that like the history is not as important. I think it's in regards to The Chosen, I'm probably being more gracious just because they are already so far above and beyond any other Christian entertainment I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yes.
With other stuff I've seen, I'll watch it and I'll just get annoyed because I'm like, that is not at all how it was.
Yeah, that makes
Whereas
sense.
with The Chosen, I mean, literally like the things that we complain about are like such minor details to where it's nothing super extreme. And so that's why with The Chosen, I'm just like, like, as long as you don't change something dramatic theologically, I pretty much trust that they've done the research. Whereas there's been so many like Jesus shows and stuff where I've seen, I'm like, did you do anything? Like did you do any research whatsoever?
Yeah. When did the Rock Monsters come out? That's what I want to know.
Oh my gosh. I've still never seen that movie all the way through.
I haven't either. I refuse to watch that movie.
I've tried watching it twice and I've only gotten in 30 minutes in both times. Terrible.
Well, we got a question here from Grace Chang. I'm tuning in late, so maybe I missed the discussion, which you did not, Grace. But do we know when the wise men arrived? Was it at the birth or perhaps when Jesus was 2 years old? Now, I'm in the 2 years old camp, and I think Brandon Robbins can really answer that really well for us.
Yeah, so I'm trying to find it right now because I can't remember the Greek word. But yeah, it's pretty certain that Jesus is older at that point because of the words that Matthew uses. And I'm trying to find it real quick. So come back to me in just a second. Okay, here we go. Sorry.
While he's looking for that, I can probably say something. So I think a lot of it kind of hinges on just historically when King Herod died. Because we know that King Herod, he issued out this order saying all that like to kill all the kids 2 years and younger, which implies to us that Jesus was probably, it had to happen within 2 years. And we know King Herod died probably around 4 BC. And so it really kind of depends on where Jesus was born there. If he was born in 4 BC, well, he would have been less than a year old, but it seems more likely that he was probably born in maybe 5 or 6 BC, in which case he would have been 2 years or younger. And it also depends on how soon after Herod ordered this, they actually enacted it and all that. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but.
Yeah. So and that's a good point too. What I was looking for is the actual word that Matthew uses to describe Jesus in that moment in Matthew chapter 2 is the word paidion. And that is the Greek word for a young child. And so we see that word used when Jesus is feeding the 5,000 and it says 5,000 men plus women and children. We see it when he tells a young girl who is dead to stand up. We see it when he, people try to prevent the children from coming to be with Jesus. But the word for an infant or a newborn is brephos. And brephos is the word like Luke uses when Jesus is laid in a manger, or when John the Baptist leaps inside of Elizabeth's womb. It's a word that refers to an infant or a newborn. And so just even in the language that we see in Matthew, it's very much telling us this is not a newborn baby being born in a manger. This is an older child. And, you know, we get the sense that he must be about 2 years old, because why else would Herod say everybody under 2 years old? There's like got to be some message that he hears there. But what I think, again, confuses us about this and why we think that Jesus is an infant when the Magi arrive is partly because of just how Matthew tells the story. He goes straight from the birth to the Magi, and so it kind of feels like that. But the other goes back to that proto-evangelium of James, where he describes it as such, where when the Magi arrive, Mary puts Jesus in a manger. And so again, it's one of those things that's like kind of stuck with us over history and creates this narrative that gets in our minds of what it all looked like.
Fascinating. So Peter asked this question: when was this filmed? Was it before or after the music? I can answer that. It was filmed after the music. So I was not there when they did all the music, but I was there for the 10 days they filmed the episode, and it was pretty cool to see it and then to see it all put together. Well, I feel like we've covered just about anything. So if we have any final thoughts, this is the time for final thoughts, or forever hold your peace. So does anybody have any final thoughts of this episode as a whole? Any specific standout moment, or maybe something we didn't cover?
Yeah, I think for us, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, but yeah, I thought the episode was amazing. Overall, I thought it was great. Like we've talked about, there are little nitpicky things that we can talk about, and I think that those are important to talk about. However, we shouldn't get stuck on those things, right? And we should, like David was saying, appreciate this show for what it is, which is why we all make the videos that we do, right? If we hated this show, we wouldn't be making these videos, right? and so for me, something that I always say when I talk about The Chosen is that The Chosen is the best piece of Christian creativity that I've seen in my lifetime, period, full stop, right? I encourage everybody to watch it, and this special is no different. For me, I thought it was great. I think they did an amazing job on the episode. The music for me is not like the super highlight of the special, just because I'm a worship pastor and I love live music, and I love, you know, having people like really authentically play their heart out, and me being able to see that. And so me kind of seeing like recorded over music is not my favorite thing, but I also loved that part as well. For the most part, I really loved all of it. So what did you think?
I love the monologues, like they were emphasizing all our friends. Yeah, it's just like you could pull out and made like sermons out of all of them, you know, because they were so obviously like thought out and researched, you know, like it wasn't just something that somebody put together. It was like really well made, well thought out.
Other than they said in the monologue that Luke Dimian says, he says it was a wooden feeding trough, but then it was a stone feeding trough in the episode. But you know, other than that, but
anyway, it was great. I love the video. I love the creativity, everything.
Awesome. Anybody else?
One final thing that I thought I could mention that we didn't talk about much, going back to Luke, that was the last kind of talking point we had there. I like that brief encounter whenever Mary Magdalene shows up and you get to see Luke, because just in their brief encounter, this once again, I just like giving, you know, like credit where credit's due to the writers. Like they kind of let you know how Luke composed his gospel, right? Because we've seen it with Matthew and John already in the show, where Matthew and John, they're kind of just writing stuff along the way. And obviously we don't really have any reason to think that that's what they did. But with Luke, this is what we do think he did. It seems like Luke, at the very beginning of his gospel, he kind of explains what he did. I was actually reading this morning because that's just where I'm at in my Bible reading. And Luke's explaining to this guy named Theophilus, he's saying, I wanted to create an orderly account from eyewitnesses so that you can have certainty in regards to what you have heard and been taught. And so it seems like Luke, being a traveling companion of Paul, he literally went around and conducted interviews. And that's exactly what you see Mary describing in this episode, where she's like, hey, I told Luke some stuff, but I didn't tell him everything. And so then you have Mary Magdalene delivering this, and then Luke says, well, I've already completed the account. Did she have something to add? And then Mary smiles, and then it cuts to black. And that's like the end of the episode. And I just thought it was cool because this is, once again, stuff where the creators of the show are allowing us to see what it might have been like. And with Luke, this is actually very close to what it probably would have been like, because he's going around collecting eyewitness accounts. And I just think that's cool, because this is stuff where growing up studying the Bible, this is stuff you long to see on, well, I was going to say just film, but on the big screen, right? So we actually got to see this in theaters. And so I just thought it was really neat to be able to see stuff like this, because I think also, just as a person who likes writing and who likes writing stuff kind of like this, I've always thought about how cool it would be to write a story about Luke going around conducting interviews and stuff. And I just thought that was a really powerful way to end the episode. And just to sum up everything, once again, thought the whole special was amazing. The monologues, especially, like I said at the very beginning of this thing, those are the things that really blew me away. I knew that the episode was going to be good, because I don't think I've seen a bad episode of The Chosen so far. But the monologues were the ones that really just kind of caught me off guard, because I was like, I don't typically listen to a lot of spoken word or anything like that. But listening to it, I was like, whoa, I just really liked that. And so overall, loved the whole experience.
Yes. Brandon?
So a couple thoughts. One, after seeing this, definitely think The Chosen need to hire the Snipes to review their spoilers, just so that nothing gets out in the future. But more importantly, so we've talked about the monologues, but what I think was especially important about the monologues to me was how genuine they felt from the actors. And I think the one that really stood out to me the most was Lada Silva, where, I mean, you just felt like those words were coming straight from her heart. You could almost feel her getting choked up as she's saying these things. Like, these aren't just words. This is what she believes in the depths of her heart coming out in this moment. And yes, it's amazing speech and acting, but it's so much more than that. And I think what is so special about that to me is really the whole point of this episode. And it's kind of the last line of the whole thing, where Luke Dimian says, "We are the messengers now." And that, I think that is the message that we have to walk away from this with. That yes, it's great that they put this out there on film. And yes, it's great that it was entertaining and well done and all of this. But the point is, we are the messengers now. This is our good news to share. And there was this moment where one of the guys from King and Country says, we have all this stuff we think we need to know that harms us, but here's what people need to know. Mm-hmm. And it's up to us to share that good news and share that message and make sure that the people do know. And so I just hope if anything comes out of this, maybe it's inviting people to go see this. Maybe it's, sharing our excitement about this, but hopefully it's more than that too. That this good news that we feel so passionately about isn't just something that we watch on a screen, but is something that we testify to through our lives.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, I'm not normally a music guy, so I was surprised how much I did get into the music portion of it. And so I really enjoyed that. I loved the monologues, and the episode was really powerful. I can't say that I cried, but I can say that I did get that lump in my throat, especially, and it was what you said, Brandon, because what you said about it, it struck a chord with me, because that's what I felt. When you see that baby and you're like, that's Jesus. He humbled him. Like, look at it. He's shivering. He's cold, and he needs their help. And it's like, wow, he humbled himself that far. And then 33 years later, as Luke Dimian said in his monologue, he humbled himself to something even worse. And so just the humility of Jesus, it shows us why God opposes the proud, right? It shows us what a true enemy pride is, and truly what humility is, and what humility looks like. And it was just a powerful image to see, and something powerful to remember as we're getting into the Christmas season. The lights, the trees, the gifts, it's all fun. And it's all fun because the light of the world came into the world in such a humble way. And so it's very cool how The Chosen puts all that in perspective. So, well, there you go. Jesus is greater than Santa. I love it. So let's one more time go around, starting with David through Brandon Robbins to the Snipe Life, and your channels and where people can find you.
Yeah, cool. So my name's David Tate once again. My channel's now Let's Be Honest, and the stuff I've got coming up, I am currently working on wrapping up a series on the lives of the 12 apostles. We are currently on the second part of Judas Iscariot, and then I'm doing one final video that's doing 12 lessons from the 12 apostles. And then after that, I think starting in the new year, I'm going to start doing a series of videos that are just Bible studies through the prophets. And the reason I'm doing that is because, first off, people don't talk about the prophets enough, and I think we should talk about that more. But also because for those of y'all who enjoy The Chosen, they quote from the prophets a whole lot, and I just want us to understand those in context and just get excited about that. I'm always wanting to get people excited about the Old Testament because I don't think we study it enough.
Right.
But yeah, and so that's where you can find me. Now let's be honest, and I think that's about it.
Yeah. So my name is Brandon Robbins. On YouTube, you can just type in my name, Brandon Robbins. You'll find me there. On Instagram, it's Brandon Robbins Ministry. But for the next few months, so this coming week, we're going to conclude a 3-part series I've been doing in a series called Beyond the Words, where we look at the nativity stories and really dive deep into exactly what's going on in those stories. So we've looked at Matthew chapter 1, then Luke chapter 2, and this next one will be Matthew chapter 2, where we look at the Magi and who they really were, and even some of the stuff we've talked about tonight. After that, it'll be a couple of different things about this Christmas special and diving in deep, even beyond some of the stuff that we talked about tonight. There's one thing I'm holding back because I really want to talk about it in that video. And
You're
then
making me really want to watch that video.
Good. That's the goal, man. And then come in the new year, got a lot of different things planned, but one of the things we'll be continuing is the Beyond the Word series on Mark's gospel, which has just blown my mind as I've been doing this. I mean, things I've read dozens of times in my life and seeing how Mark weaves so many amazing things together. Like Mark chapter 5 is now one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. There's just so much happening in that first story about the pigs going off the cliff that you just never even knew. But so we'll be doing that, and that'll kind of like perfectly lead up to Easter, because 16 chapters and the way I'm doing it every other week, it's going to hit right then. So I'm really excited about how that plays out.
Yeah, and we're the Snipe Life. We talk about creativity through the lens of Christianity, and so, we're in a weird spot right now because we're kind of halfway through season 1 of The Chosen, really breaking down, the details and the different things in there. That is one of our strengths, like we've talked about tonight, is just finding those details that maybe other people just haven't found from a cinematography, creativity point of view, or things that we want to talk about in The Chosen. So obviously we'll be doing a bunch of videos about the Christmas episode and breaking down a lot of the things that we see throughout all of that. But then as we go into the new year, we're going to be doing a lot of things with hopefully some other media, some different movies and stuff like that as well, kind of breaking down and maybe comparing it even to The Chosen and seeing, here's where the acting is great here, here's where it's not so great here, and let's talk about that, why that is. Right now, we actually have a bunch of interviews from our trip to Washington, D.C. that we're putting out. And so if you guys want to check those out, definitely come to our channel and see how you can see those.
Yeah. And here on Durbania, in the next few weeks, I got 2 patron requests I got to get out there. So one to dive into E.T. So we're going to find Jesus in E.T., and that's going to be a good one to dig deep into. And then the Charlie Brown Christmas special. So we're definitely going to get into that one. And, of course, I'm going to have to talk about the shepherd at some point as we're leading up to Christmas. Spent all this time talking about the messengers, and I have not yet talked on my channel about the shepherd. So going to have to make some time to do that as well. So be sure to head to each of these guys' channels. Their links to their channels are in my description. So you can head to my description right now. You can see the links to all their channels. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so that you're notified as soon as all of those great videos are dropped. If you're not subscribed here, hit that subscribe button here and hit the bell beside that so you'll get the same thing, notified when all that stuff drops. So I'm Durbin. This is everybody. We had a blast hanging out with you guys, talking about the messengers. So if you haven't seen it yet and you stuck through all these spoilers, I really hope what it's done is it's made you really want to check out this episode, the concert, the special, and everything. I mean, if you want something that feels like Christmas this year, you should be checking out the Chosen Christmas special. So with that, have a great one, everybody.